Greetings, friends around the world. This is Dr. Bob Thiel for the Bible News Prophecy channel. I'd like to talk about Jade Helm, Captivity, and Prophecy. Jade Helm? Have you heard of it? Do you know what it is? I'd like to read a little bit of information about it. Jade Helm 15 is a planned United States military training exercise that's supposed to take place over multiple states from July 15th through September 15th, 2015. It covers a huge area. It's going to involve the U.S. Army Special Operations Command and other U.S. force units, and they're going to be in Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, Colorado, although the map also shows California's got it on there. It's unusual. It's attracted the attention of commentators, conspiracy theorists, politicians, and some are worried about the prospect of the United States government actually declaring martial law in those regions. The Austin American-Statesman newspaper noted that after plans and maps of the exercise were made public, there was an explosion of outrage on social media after the release of the map, which labeled Texas, Utah, and a small part of the southern tip of California as hostile. There's also speculation about Walmart stores being closed and be used for guerrilla warfare and processing for FEMA. And on April 28th of 2015, the Texas governor, Greg Abbott, he ordered the Texas State Guard to monitor the operation, declaring, quote, "During the training operation, it's important that Texans know their safety, constitutional rights, private property right, and civil liberties will not be infringed." There are some people who believe that this summer the Barack Obama administration intends to actually take over parts of places like Texas and Utah. Some say it's because they didn't intend to vote for him. Some say because they are more open in terms of allowing gun laws. There's a variety of speculations as to supposedly the reason why. One store owner says he's not trusting what we're being told. He says he thinks there's, his name is Mike Hightower, says I think there's more involved and said that. And here's something. It says if Washington wants to cool the embers of the controversy, then it should quit stoking the fire. As posting of a map of Jade Helm 15 as just exercises, and then label some area of the country, including Texas, as hostile. Now this is according to KHOU, which is Channel 11 in Houston. And many people were saying, if the government wants to do something, why don't they just put the troops over in the southern border and stop people from coming over? That's another issue. Another person thinks it's more than coincidental. The FBI director just confessed in February that the presence of ISIS, that's the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, can be felt in all 50 states. The Pentagon's running its biggest military training exercise with every branch of the military across the 7 southwestern states. And someone says, a reporter says, it's neither overreactionary nor conspiratorial to call into question or to ask for transparency about Jade Helm or any other government activity. Basically, some in Texas and other places are worried that because the government labeled their territory as hostile, that maybe there's some plans to take it over. They brought other people involved in this. They talked to people in the government. They talked to former people. For example, Roy Potter, who was a 28-year veteran of the Army, and he was a lieutenant colonel, and he was in various police and military intelligence exercises and positions in the world, said, listeners better wake up quickly. He highlights the Jade Helm exercises in multiple states, saying, 2 of them are called hostile. This action or this exercise is unprecedented and dangerous, and explained that this looks like there's a big difference between exercise geared for civil disobedience and exercise listing unconventional warfare and to take over those states militarily, which is what Jade Helm is listed at. Now, there are a variety of conspiracy theories about this. One is that the actual name Jade Helm is a special code term. According to one source I looked at, Jade Helm is supposed to mean blue helmet. Helm is the German term for helmet. Now that's true, but jade isn't usually blue. I mean, there is a blue type of jade, but most jade is definitely green or dark green. But somebody says, no, this means blue helmets. This is what the United Nations wears. Therefore, this is a United Nations exercise, and it's a plan to take over part of the government, actually part of the United States, and give it to the federal government that it's not currently controlling. I do not believe that Jade Helm 15 is an exercise for the United Nations to come over and take over the government at this stage. Now, there's a Texas congressman by the name of Louis Gohmert, and he explains why a lot of Texans are worried about this. He says, over the past few weeks, my office has been inundated with calls referring to the Jade Helm 15 military exercise scheduled to take place between July 15th and September 15th, 2015. This military practice has some concern that the U.S. Army is preparing for modern-day martial law. Certainly, I understand those concerns. So Congressperson said he understands why some people be concerned about it. He says, when leaders within the current administration, and by that he's referring to the Barack Obama administration, believe that major threats to the country include those who support the Constitution, are military veterans, or even cling to guns or religion, patriotic Americans have reason to be concerned, he wrote. And he says, I observed the maps depicting hostile, permissive, and uncertain states and locations. I was rather appalled that the hostile areas amazingly have a Republican majority clinging to their guns and religions and believe the sanctity of the U.S. Constitution. Again, this is according to Texas Congressman Louis Gohmert. And when you do look at the map, it does have permissive areas and hostile areas. Although I would say that the gun laws in Southern California are pretty similar to the rest of California outside the cities. There are about 1,200 troops that are supposed to be involved in Jade Helm, mainly Army Green Berets and some Navy SEALs and some Air Force accompaniment. And basically, some say that this so-called training maneuver is just a cover story. What's going on? President Obama is about to use special forces to put Texas under martial law. NPR reported that. Now, NPR doesn't believe that, by the way, but they reported that some people believe that. And let me read something that somebody who's kind of stoked the fires on this. His name is David Hodges. He's got a radio show, and he put this on his website on April 30th, 2015. Jade Helm and Walmart are inextricably linked, and the existing evidence suggests one of two possible endgame probabilities for Jade Helm. Okay, two, whether they are. One, converted Walmart stores will be processing centers for FEMA, Camp Political Prisoners, he continued. So people think that the Federal Emergency Management Group is going to process political prisoners and put them into some shuttered Walmart stores. Two, some Walmarts are going to be used as supply and staging centers for an internal conflict within the United States. So they have two speculative theories, if you will, conspiracy theories, related to Walmart stores that were shuttered. I don't share that opinion, but this is what he said. But something else is interesting. Back in 2008, U.S. President Barack Obama called for, quote, a civilian national security force as one part of his agenda. And in the spring of 2015, just very recently actually, Al Sharpton called for a federal takeover of local police. Al Sharpton actually called for the local police departments throughout the whole United States to be under federal control. Now, one issue is that they don't think the police are doing certain things correctly and can't monitor themselves. But I actually think if you have a lot more local police units as opposed to one big federal police unit, that you're more likely to find they're more upfront and that it's harder to cover certain things up. Police don't have a great reputation when it comes to some things in terms of internal affairs they don't want people to know about. And to have it on a national level, I think, is a disaster. Plus, it's totally unconstitutional. It's against what the United States is supposed to stand for. But we're also, even if we don't get the an official federal takeover of the police departments. What we are seeing is there's more federal funding associated with police departments to get police departments to do more of what the federal government wants. Plus, we're seeing increased militarization of local police departments, which I also think is difficult. It's not really what the intent of the Constitution was and what's supposed to happen. Now, what about all these conspiracies? What about Bible prophecy? And what about captivity? As I said, some conspiracy theorists are saying that Americans are going to be taken captive, or some at least, and perhaps put in Walmarts or do other things with them. I'd like to read something from the Bible. This is from the book of Isaiah, chapter 8. I'm going to read from the New King James Version, in case you wish to follow along with me or look in your own Bible, although you can probably follow along on screen as well. Starting verse 2, Isaiah wrote, "Do not say a conspiracy concerning all that this people call a conspiracy, nor be afraid of their threats, nor be troubled. The Lord of hosts, him you shall hallow. Let him be your fear, and let him be your dread. He will be as a sanctuary, but a stone of stumbling and a rock of offense to both the houses of Israel, and as a trap and a snare to the inhabitants of Jerusalem. And many among them shall stumble. They shall fall and be broken and be snared and taken." Now what this is saying is, God's people don't need to worry so much about all the conspiracies that are out there. It's not that none of these bad things can ever happen. It's not that I totally trust the intentions of the U.S. federal government or some of its exercises. And some who descend from the house of Israel, which would include the United States, may end up having issues like that, and that can be. But as Christians, we're supposed to put our confidence in God. And let's go down to verse 17. It says, "And I will wait on the Lord, who hides his face from the house of Jacob, and I will hope in him. Here am I, and the children whom the Lord has given me. We are for signs and wonders in Israel from the Lord of hosts, who dwells in Mount Zion." So basically it's saying those in the true church, those who dwell in Mount Zion, can be protected by God and don't need to be worried so much about every conspiracy out there. Now, as far as Jade Helm itself, I'd like to actually read something from the United States Army Special Operations Command website, what it says. "Members of the U.S. Army Special Operations Command will train with other U.S. Armed Forces units July 15th through September 15 in a multi-state exercise called Jade Helm. They wanted to do this in 7 states, but the Army Special Forces is only going to be in 5. This is there'll be economic gains to the area, and you don't need to be worried about it. Is basically what this says, even though it's somewhat unprecedented in terms of its size. So what's the truth about Jade Helm? The truth is that the United States military is holding a massive training exercise, which has designated a couple of states as hostile. The exercise is designed to supposedly see how to deal with different types of enemies. Now, the truth is, I don't believe that the intent of Jade Helm is to take over states like Texas this summer. But as I said before, another truth is I am concerned about seeing increased militarization of local police forces. And yes, I do believe that the United States government is preparing for civil unrest, martial law, and possible civil war. And yes, I do believe that massive civil unrest and fighting will come to the United States. But what about Americans being taken captive? Well, the biblical reality is that the United States will one day be taken captive, although it's not going to be in 2015. And many of its people are going to be made slaves. This will also affect the Canadians, as well as those in the United Kingdom and ultimately those in Australia and New Zealand. In the book of Deuteronomy 28, it talks about a curse of not listening to God, of having debt and borrowing from foreigners. Now this has happened in the United States already. The United States is in more debt than any nation has ever been. Now let's go down to verse 47 and read what the Bible says here. "Because you do not serve the Lord your God with joy and gladness of heart for the abundance of everything, therefore you shall serve your enemies, whom the Lord will send against you, in hunger and thirst, in nakedness, in need of everything, and he will put a yoke of iron on your neck until he has destroyed you." Verse 49. "The Lord will bring a nation against you from afar, from the end of the earth, as swift as eagle flies, a nation whose language you do not understand. You will not understand. A nation of fierce countenance, which does not respect the elderly nor show favor to the young. They shall eat to increase your livestock and produce your land until you are destroyed. They will not leave you grain or new wine or oil or the increase of your cattle or your offspring until they've destroyed you. Now notice, this is talking about who's going to take over? Somebody comes from far away with a language that people do not understand. So this is not talking about a takeover of the United States by the United States government. Now I'm not saying the United States government will never institute any form of martial law or something along that lines. In terms of actually being taken over and taken captive, the Bible talks about it's going to come from some place that speaks a different language. Now I'd like to go into Jeremiah chapter 9. I'm going to skip the first few verses and go down to verse 16. I will scatter them also among the Gentiles, whom neither they nor their fathers have known, and I'll send a sword after them until I've consumed them. Once again, now we see captivity, scattering, going far away. Again, this is not something that all Americans are going to be held in concentration camps by the American government or something along those lines. Now, in the book of Isaiah, chapter 47, there's a variety of prophecies. Now, I'm going to point to Isaiah 47 to explain briefly why those who will take the U.S. captive are going to be European. Isaiah 47 verse 1 says, "Come down and sit in the dust, O virgin daughter of Babylon. Sit on the ground without a throne, O daughter of the Chaldeans, for you shall no longer be called tender and delicate." So we see somebody called the Chaldeans and the daughter of Babylon. So it's not ancient Babylon, but a prophecy for the future. Now let's go down in verse 6. I was angry with my people. I have profaned my inheritance and given them into your hand. In other words, God's going to allow the daughter of Babylon to do something. You showed them no mercy. And I've read passages already from the Old Testament about that. On the elderly you laid your yoke very heavily. Now in verses 7 and 8, this virgin daughter of Babylon makes nearly identical statements as does the harlot Babylon in Revelation 18 verse 7. I'm not going to go there right now. It's the same power. And the yoke that we're talking about includes slavery. And this daughter of ancient Babylon is also talked about in Jeremiah 50 verses 41 to 42. And you go through all this, again, it has to do with Europe. Now my focus right now isn't that so much as to tell you the Bible does prophesy captivity coming to the United States, but not predominantly from the United States government. Now things are going to get worse than Jade Helm people believe, the conspiracy theorists. But Jesus said in Matthew 24:21, "For then there will be great tribulation, such as not been since the beginning of the world, until this time, no, nor ever shall be." This is not going to happen in 2015. We have several years before it can happen, and I don't believe it can happen before 2019 at this instant. Now, I'd like to read something from the book of Lamentations, Lamentations 5, verse 4. "We pay for the water we drink, our wood comes at a price, they pursue us at our heels, we labor, have no rest. We've given our land to the Egyptians and to the Assyrians to be satisfied with bread. Our fathers have sinned and are no more, but we bear their iniquities. Servants rule over us. There is none to deliver us from their hand." So a time of captivity is going to come. And people do not realize that that's really going to hit the United States. Yeah, Jade Helm, that exercise is going to happen, but it's not the same thing. Now I'd like to go to the book of Isaiah. And I'm not going to read all of it, but there's a few things I do want to read. Chapter 10 of Isaiah. It says, starting verse 1, "What are those who decree unrighteous decrees?" Verse 3, "What will you do in the day of punishment and in the desolation which will come from afar? To whom will you flee for help? And where will you leave your glory?" So again, another prophecy about something coming from afar as opposed to within the United States. Now, unrighteous decrees, you're following court cases in the United States? starting with Roe versus Wade, that legalized abortion, things going on with unrighteous decrees related to the homosexual agenda and homosexual marriage, and other actions that the government has taken are certainly unrighteous decrees. I'm not going to read all the passages, but if you go further into Isaiah chapter 10, starting verse 5, you see that God says he's going to raise up the Assyrians, and they're going to punish a hypocritical nation, as it says in the Old King James Version of the Bible. And even though this power doesn't mean to do so in its heart, as it says in Isaiah 10 verse 7, it'll do it anyway and destroy them. Now, some do not believe it's possible that the Europeans could ever want to destroy the United States. But I'd like to read an interesting passage from the book of Lamentations. Lamentations chapter 1, verse 1. How lonely sits the city that was full of people. How like a widow is she, who is great among the nations. The princess among the provinces has become a slave. Great among the nations. Who's considered to be great among the nations? Well, it used to be Great Britain, and so it'll be affected too, I believe, by the way, and the United States. But what I really want to focus on is verse 2. She weeps bitterly in the night. Her tears are on her cheeks. Among all her lovers, she has none to comfort her. All her friends have dealt treacherously with her. They have become her enemies. The allies, the European allies of the United States, the continental allies predominantly, are going to turn against the United States. The time is going to come. Now, I've read this next passage quite a few times, but for those of you who perhaps haven't seen it, or haven't seen some of the videos, I'd like you to consider what it says in Daniel 11, verse 39. So let me read this. Thus, he shall act against the strongest fortresses with a foreign god, which he shall acknowledge, and advance its glory. He shall cause them to rule over many, and divide the land for gain. Now, the he is a European king of the north. And who has the strongest fortresses? Well, the strongest military fortresses in the 21st century belong to the United States. There are other prophecies in Lamentations 4:16 and Joel 3 verses 2 and 3 that talk about people being scattered and the land divided. Now, some don't think it can happen. Now, that's actually prophesied as well. Amos 9 verse 10 says, all the sinners of my people shall die by the sword, who say, quote, the calamity shall not overtake nor confront us. So some do not believe that this can happen. But that's not the case. People who think the United States will continue indefinitely should ask themselves something about the Bible. Why do they think that? You might consider that the Bible talks about the king of the north in Daniel 11, 39 and 40, the king of the south in Daniel 11 verse 40, and the kings of the east in Revelation 16, 12. But what about a king of the west? Like the United States. Certainly, you'd think the United States would be mentioned. And it is, but it's mentioned as being eliminated. As far as captivity, let me read one other thing. I'm going to read Ezekiel chapter 22, verse 13 to 15. Behold, therefore I beat my fists at the dishonest prophet which you have made, the bloodshed which has been in your midst. Can your heart endure, or your hands remain strong? In the days I shall deal with you, I the Lord have spoken, and will do it. I will scatter you among the nations, disperse you throughout the countries, and remove your filthiness completely from you. Now, notice it talked about dishonest prophet. How has the United States made dishonest prophets? Well, quantitative easing program, where it just invented money and assets, supposedly. The fact that it continues to have massive trade deficits, and the fact that it continues to borrow from foreign countries it doesn't really intend to pay back, the United States has made dishonest prophets. In Leviticus 26, verse 33, God says, I will scatter you among the nations and draw a sword out after you. And he says he'll do that because people will not obey God. The Bible has lots of prophecies about what's going to happen to the descendants of Jacob, known as Ephraim and Manasseh. We have an article on this particular subject, which you can read, which explains why some of the prophecies that look like they apply to the ancient nation of Israel actually apply to the United States. And I'll have a link for that where you found this particular video. Now, the truth about Jade Helm is it is a large-scale militaristic operation that's concerned many, and some are concerned about it. But the biblical truth is, irrespective of what the U.S. military does or national civilian army does or police force does, the time will come when the United States will be taken over militarily, and its people will be taken captive. And it will be by someone who has a language other than English as its native language. That's what the Bible teaches. Those of you who wish to believe the Bible should repent and understand to pay more attention to your spiritual health than some conspiracies that are related to Jade Helm during this particular summer. This is Dr. Bob Thiel for the Bible News Prophecy Channel.